Even though Final Fantasy was in full swing by the time the 16-bit era arrived, significant progress was made during this period in terms of establishing the identity of the franchise to wider audiences. But while Final Fantasy IV, V, and indeed Mystic Quest each played their part on this journey, none of those games had quite the same impact as Final Fantasy VI. As an even-numbered entry, Final Fantasy VI placed more emphasis on characters and story than progression systems and mechanics. But its development was also quite different from every prior game, as Hironobu Sakaguchi was forced to delegate responsibilities to his two protégés, Yoshinori Kitase and Hiroyuki Ito. Regardless, the final product ended up as one befitting of the Final Fantasy name, and this then led to countless plaudits and an impact that has lasted decades. Now, we've run through a few intriguing facts about Final Fantasy VI before, and links to those two videos can be found in the description below. But for this iteration, we wanted to focus on some of the finer points relating to the game itself, as opposed to its development history or impact on popular culture. So please, join us as we run through a boatload of facts about Final Fantasy VI that you never knew you needed, in our typical granular style. The Imp status effect is a bizarre one, appearing in very few entries in the Final Fantasy series as a whole after it originated in Final Fantasy VI. For its original incarnation, when a character was afflicted, the Imp status reduced their attack to 0, and their base strength and defense were used to determine how much damage they dealt and took, while also restricting the number of commands the afflicted character could use. But despite being a status condition that looked solely negative at first glance, with the right knowledge and equipment, those afflicted by Imp could become one of the greatest benefits available to the party, capable of destroying even the hardest bosses in the entire game. And part of this was around the equipment. The Imp equipment set, consisting of the Impartisan weapon, Reed Cloak, Tortoise Shield, and the Sorcerer armor pieces, were designed solely to be equipped by Imps, and had next to no benefit to characters using them outside of the Imp state. If equipped by an Imp, however, the Impartisan had one of the highest attack values in the entire game, and the armor pieces collectively had the highest defense and magic defense. While Imps had no access to magic though, they could utilize another skill through the use of Dragoon Boots and the Dragon Horn, and this then made brilliant use of the Impartisan's full power, thanks to it being classed as a spear. The jump command, made considerably more powerful with the multi-hitting capabilities of the Dragon Horn, could then have characters dealing maximum damage multiple times, all while avoiding plenty of attacks through the airtime mechanic. Acquiring the Imp equipment though was challenging, requiring players to steal from prominent enemies like Tombres and Tyrannosaurus, and then betting Recloaks and Tortoise Shields to finish the set at the Dragon's Neck Colosseum. But if the entire party was turned into an Imp, and then outfitted with a full set of gear, they could become affectionately known as the Imp Squad, capable of hopping up and down while dealing crazy amounts of damage as little green tortoises, and even Kefka would be felled with very little effort. One of the most prominent scenes in Final Fantasy VI took place immediately after Kefka had wreaked havoc on the world by attaining godhood. Celes, having awoken on a small, desolate island, discovered that she had been looked after by the Gestalian scientist Cid, the same man who developed Magitech technology, infusing magic into soldiers, including the likes of Kefka, and indeed, Celes herself. In the process of her caretaking, Cid fell gravely ill, which led to a game mechanic where the player and Celes were required to gather fish in order to help Cid survive his condition, with the consequence for failure being his death. But the mechanics of the minigame that determined Cid's fate were strangely complex given the simple nature of the actions required. Cid had an invisible health bar which started at 120 and decreased at a rate of 1 per second. Each fish then caught had an effect on his current health in the hopes of healing him. If Cid's health then reached above 255, he was saved, and the story played out as such. But if his health dropped below 30, Cid died, leading to one of the saddest scenes in not only Final Fantasy VI, but the entire series. The fish themselves, though, were also more complex than seemed at first glance, and this was because the player had to keep a keen eye on how fast the fish were moving when caught. If a fish moved slowly, then it was classified as rotten and actually harmed Cid, reducing his health rather than healing him. A medium-sized fish then had a 50-50 chance of healing him or hurting him, and only fast-moving fish gave him a definite heal of 32 HP. This meant that players were not only battling the timer, but also needed a keen eye, so as not to hasten Cid's death by accident. It can be said that the storyline is more poignant if the player chooses not to help Cid, or was unaware of the ability to do so, due to the emotional impact of the scenes that followed. But it was clear that healing Cid was indeed a reward for players who knew what to look out for. Now, Final Fantasy VI had a plethora of side content, with quests and minigames large and small located all across the world. One side quest in particular was peculiar in the way it operated, simply due to how low-key and inane the task at hand was, but also how tragic and bittersweet the story of the quest turned out to be. When the party arrived at Moblitz in the World of Balance, one of the houses was home to a wounded soldier who had escaped from the Gastalian army. The soldier asked that his letters be sent to his girlfriend Lola in Miranda, as he was too hurt to be able to deliver them himself. After resting at the inn, the player found a reply from the soldier's love on his desk, and the soldier asked that another of his letters be sent to Lola. After accomplishing this feat 5 times, the soldier gratefully gave the party the Tintinabulum accessory, which healed the equipped party member when they walked around the map. Neither the quest itself nor the reward seemed particularly noteworthy. That was until the world was ravaged by Kefka. In the world of Ruin, Cyan had passed through Miranda and found that Lola had continued to send letters to her love, but she never got a reply from the soldier. This was because, unbeknownst to Lola, Moblitz had been destroyed by Kefka's actions, and her partner had been killed in the process. Cyan, wanting to help Lola retain hope, began to write replies to her under the guise of being her partner, claiming that he had escaped and recovered. He went so far as to send hand-woven silk flowers as well, as real flowers no longer bloomed. The party came to realise that Cyan was alive due to recognising his handwriting on one of those letters, but kept it to themselves when Lola asked them to reply for her because they hoped to find Cyan at the end of her pigeon's flight. Sure enough, after following the pigeon to Mount Zozo, Cyan was found and recruited back into the party once more. If the player then returned to Lola after regaining Cyan, he confessed to writing the letters to her. But surprisingly, Lola always knew that the letters she received were not from the soldier in Moblitz, and appreciated the effort Cyan had gone to help her overcome her grief. Gilgamesh was not a well-known staple when Final Fantasy VI was released. However, when work was underway on Final Fantasy VI Advance, the team decided to add Gilgamesh as a hidden Esper. And as part of this, they added a few specific details that related Gilgamesh to some of his other appearances. Gilgamesh was obtained by finding the now infamous Excalibur sword in the auction house at Jidoor, and then betting it at the Dragon's Neck Colosseum. This then prompted a fight with Gilgamesh that, if won, brought Gilgamesh into the party as a Magicite. During the encounter, Gilgamesh used a Naginata in his default form, but he also had access to a wide range of weapons that weren't visible. For example, he could throw numerous weapons including the Lightbringer, Ragnarok, Zantetsuken, and the Mitsunokami, which he had presumably picked up on his travels. Because by the time Final Fantasy VI Advance had released, Gilgamesh had also been included in the enhanced port of Final Fantasy I, which contained the Lightbringer and the Ragnarok as some of the strongest weapons. Final Fantasy IV The After Years, which contained the Mitsunokami as the strongest katana, and of course Final Fantasy VIII, where he picked up the Zantetsuken from Odin. When Gilgamesh was summoned, as he had thrown those weapons away, he only had access to 3 more swords, Excalibur, and the Masamune. But Gilgamesh also had a 4th move that saw him team up with Enkidu. It meant that in Final Fantasy VI Advance, Gilgamesh was subtly built upon every previous chronological appearance of the character to date. Final Fantasy VI is host to the single largest party in any Final Fantasy game, with 14 permanent members and a boatload of temporary guest characters such as Banon and Biggs and Wedge. Some of these members behave in very strange and unique ways too, like Gao with his rage abilities or the famed mimic Gogo. But Umaru, obtained in the world of Ruin, behaves perhaps strangest of all. Umaru personified the Berserker job in Final Fantasy VI, meaning he could not be directly controlled in battle. Instead, he acted on his own in an automated fashion. Ordinarily, that would be the end of the story with a Berserker job, but in Final Fantasy VI there were specific pieces of gear that allowed players to modify the way Umaru worked, and this could make him more powerful than he first appeared. Umaru had 2 default attacks, a regular attack and a body blow that ignored defense. But if equipped with the Berserker Ring, he gained the Throw Ally ability, which used the same mechanics as Body Blow, but using the stats of the thrown ally instead of Umaru's. The player could therefore prioritize a particular character by afflicting that ally with Sleep or Confuse, which meant Umaru would target that character and also cure them of the ailment in the process of hurling them headfirst into an enemy. The Blizzard Orb was another accessory that could be equipped. This granted the Snowstorm attack, a magical ice attack with a solid 100 power that affected all enemies. Now, equipping both of these accessories gave Umaru an even chance of using one of these 4 attacks. But by equipping just one accessory, it was more likely that Umaru would use the attack associated with the given accessory. The best way to utilize this was to equip the Berserker Ring, making Throw Ally more likely to be used, and then using Umaru alongside Cyan, as it allowed Umaru to throw Cyan even when he charged his Bushido gauge. Equipping a Black Belt as the secondary accessory then meant Umaru could also counter-attack when hit, but unlike other party members, Umaru countered with any of his attacks, and this made him a fantastic candidate to be sent into the Dragon's Neck Colosseum. It's pretty common in any RPG or video game in general to want to open up any treasure chest encountered, with the hopes of obtaining new items and new gear. But in certain games, there are instances whereby this action can instead be quite punishing. Mimics, for example, hide inside certain chests waiting to pounce on unsuspecting parties, but Final Fantasy XII took things even further with the Zodiac Spear. This has now become infamous for its method of acquisition, which required players to not open certain treasure chests until the end of the game. What's interesting, however, is that Final Fantasy VI, another game directed by Hiroyuki Ito, had a similar, albeit much less punishing version of this mechanic. In the Nash Caves, South Figaro and South Figaro Caves, there were chests that gave very basic items, given how early in the game they were found. But if these chests were left alone, the quality of the items housed within actually improved over time. In the Nash Caves, for example, if the chests were left unopened in the World of Ruin, they grew to contain a guard bracelet, an elixir, and a ribbon. And the chests in the South Figaro Caves actually scaled up twice, offering a Thunder Rod from one chest the second time through the caves, or a Hero's Ring if the player waited until the World of Ruin. And we mentioned earlier in the video about guest characters helping to make one of the largest playable rosters in a Final Fantasy game, and how many of those characters had unique commands that separated them from the regular party. But one of those characters had an ability that is completely and utterly game-breaking, and it belonged to perhaps the most unassuming temporary party member of all. Yes, we're talking about the Ghost from the Phantom Train. The Possess ability, which was unique to the Ghost, could instantly defeat any enemy or boss. This was because it was treated differently from other abilities in the game, using unique instant death mechanics that no enemy had any way of resisting. When playing Final Fantasy VI ordinarily, there wouldn't be any way to test this, as the only enemies the player encountered with a ghost in the party were on the Phantom Train, and none of them resisted instant death anyway. But by modifying the game, Possess could be used outside of its intended environment. Now, the fun fact around this is that the developers anticipated that players may do this, and came up with a contingency plan. It meant if the Possess ability was used outside of that environment by any character, there was a punishment. And that punishment was removing the character who used Possess from the battle too. Unlike the Ghost, however, the party member was still alive. They were just forcefully returned to the Blackjack airship, ready to be re-recruited when the player needed. This made Possess the single strongest command in the entire game, able to defeat even the final boss with a single button press. But it took playing the game through alternative means to use it effectively. And with that, they were 7 facts about Final Fantasy VI that you probably didn't know you needed. Please share in the comments below which you found to be the most interesting, and if you enjoyed the video, please feel free to hit the like button and subscribe for more content. Alright everyone, with that, this is Darryl signing out. As always, I'd like to give a big thank you to all of our Patreon and YouTube membership supporters, especially Benjamin Stowe, the livestream, and Zook and TDK, who are super special Onion Knight supporters, and of course, a big thank you to everyone for watching this video. I'll see you all again soon for more Final Fantasy goodness.